Good day, everybody. This is Chris with The Ancient Scholar. I hope this video finds you doing well. And this is going to be an update to the COVID-19 video that I did a little earlier. And as we are now aware, the COVID-19 situation is highly dynamic. It has evolved significantly, or rather substantially. We are now in the setting of a global pandemic. And back when I did my first video, there were relatively few cases. Documented cases, that is, in the United States, and that has since changed. We now have thousands of documented cases occurring in the United States, and we've actually had a shift from more cases outside of China than in China, and countries outside of China, such as Italy, Iran, and other areas of Europe, are now being hit very heavily by the COVID-19 pandemic. So what I would like to do is I'd like to just do another video to update everyone on COVID-19, and this is going to be material that will be contemporary to 17 March 2020. All right, so this situation is evolving very rapidly, and I expect some of the information presented here will potentially be outdated rather quickly. So what I thought I'd do is I would actually do a several-part series of videos talking about what we currently know about the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID-19 situation. And I'll start by talking about the basic pathophysiology of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the disease manifested from that, known as COVID-19. I will talk a little bit about the epidemiology, and I will focus on talking about how we can intuit or understand some of the unique terms that are thrown around, such as the R0 term and the case fatality rate and incubation period, and so on and so forth. Part 3, I'll spend some time talking about how we can diagnose COVID-19, both through signs and symptoms clinically and through labs and diagnostics, through plasma lab testing and imaging. We'll also talk about treatment. I'll talk about some of the standard therapies and some of the more novel or emerging therapies or investigational therapies. As of current, we do not have any specific approved therapies beyond some basic supportive care implications. In Part 5, I'll talk about the disposition of these patients, people that are suffering from COVID-19, and of course this is also going to revolve around a conversation that is going to focus on prognosis. And then finally, we will talk about the safety implications involved in caring for patients who may have COVID-19 and just general societal safety implications as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on Part 1, Pathophysiology. All right, so this is just going to be a quick review of the high-yield pathophysiological concepts referring to the SARS-CoV-2 virus / COVID-19 disease. So what do we need to know? What is the most important information we need to know about this? Well, we need to understand, first of all, just some basic terminology. And the basic terminology is really this. There are two terms. The first term is often referred to as the SARS-CoV-2, right? So SARS-CoV-2 is actually the proper name of the virus. Some people also refer to this as the 2019 novel coronavirus. Okay, so the coronaviruses are a rather large family of viruses. There are at least 5 of them known to cause disease in human beings, but these cause diseases in many other mammals. We actually know that a certain kind of coronavirus is very problematic in cattle and can cause a severe diarrheal kind of illness, and there's actually a vaccine in cattle. Unfortunately, that is a very different kind of coronavirus than the one that we're currently dealing with. Therefore, that vaccine and the antibodies that those animals may produce as a result of that vaccine are not going to be helpful in managing patients suffering from infections of this current SARS-CoV-2. The second thing we need to understand is that there is another term called COVID-19, and that is kind of what is capturing the headlines of the news. Technically speaking, COVID-19 is the disease caused by the SARS-CoV-2. And SARS just stands for sudden acute respiratory syndrome. CoV is coronavirus, and 2 is the second type of coronavirus under the umbrella of this family of coronaviruses known to cause disease in human beings. So COVID-19 is the disease, right? This is the signs and symptoms and the lab tests that change and the imaging that we see. It's all of the clinical manifestations that we see as a result of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It is in some way similar to the HIV/AIDS paradigm, where HIV is a virus and AIDS is a syndrome that results from the viral infection of HIV. This is a similar concept, right? SARS-CoV-2 is the virus and COVID-19 is the disease. So what is a basic pathophysiology, biology surrounding this? Well, as I mentioned in the earlier video, is a positive sense single-stranded RNA virus, and that particular virus, this particular virus is surrounded by a lipid envelope, and so this lipid envelope is very similar to the phospholipid bilayer that we see in cell membranes. And as such, it is going to be susceptible to being attacked by agents that can emulsify fats. So things like soaps, for example, are very effective at disrupting this particular virus. So this particular virus is actually not a very quote-unquote strong virus in that it can't really last very long outside of the body, perhaps hours if it is in a good respiratory droplet medium. But as these droplets dry out and become compromised and exposed to ultraviolet light and exposed to cleaning solutions, things of that nature, these viruses are actually fairly fragile compared to other kinds of viruses. And we see this in many enveloped viruses that have a phospholipid envelope. This virus is, like many viruses that impact humans, zoonotic. And zoonotic just means that the virus was crossed over from other animals, and we believe currently that the original reservoir was in a bat, and there was a crossover to a pangolin, which then had crossover to a human being, and this is explained in my other video. The transmission currently, as we understand it, is droplet. It is not airborne. So when we talk about airborne transmission, what we mean is that we talk about the actual viral particle itself can be suspended and can float around in the air and cause infection. We don't think that's necessarily the case with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The SARS-CoV-2 virus has to be within a medium, and that medium tends to be a respiratory droplet. So think of little droplets of fluid or mucus that come out of the respiratory tract, and then when somebody sneezes or coughs, those viruses are essentially dissolved in that fluid, and then that fluid gets aerosolized into the air and it floats around, and then gravity tends to pull it down, and then it'll land on objects, inanimate objects we call fomites, and then it can land on an object, and as long as it's suspended in that fluid medium, it will last, we think, hours potentially, maybe days, depending on the kind of object that it falls on, and then someone else can come into contact with that object. Or if somebody sneezes or coughs, that droplet that's produced or that aerosol that's produced could kind of be ejected from one person and go to another person, and they could that other person could be just directly exposed to those droplets. So it is droplet transmission. As I explained in the other video, there are what we call S-spike proteins, and those S-spike proteins bind to very specific kinds of receptors. And the specific receptor we think that these S-spike proteins bind to is something known as the ACE2, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor. And this receptor is expressed in large numbers on respiratory mucosal cells, on the ciliated cells of the, so when you talk about the upper and lower respiratory tract, many of those areas are lined in little cells, little columnar cells that have cilia, and essentially the cilia kind of beat very rapidly and they sweep mucus up, and this produces something called a mucociliary escalator. It's a way of getting mucus out of the airway, and so mucus kind of acts like a sticky trap for viruses and bacteria and particulate pollutants, and they stick to that mucus, and then those ciliated cells kind of brush the mucus up, and it does look like there are ACE2 receptors on those mucosal cells, the goblet cells and the ciliated cells of the upper airway. But we also see these expressed on what are called type 2 alveolar pneumocytes. And so when you look at the alveoli, those are the actual air sacs, quote unquote, right? The microscopic little air sacs where gas exchange occurs. And the alveoli are essentially made of two different kinds of cells. You've got the type 1 pneumocytes, and the type 1 pneumocytes kind of create the actual membrane where oxygen diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses out. And then you have these other cells called the type 2 alveolar pneumocytes, and these are cells that produce surfactant that kind of decreases the surface tension on those alveoli and helps keep them from collapsing. And so we do see that the ACE2 receptor is expressed, I believe, primarily on the, or in high concentrations on these type 2 alveolar pneumocytes. Now, we also have ACE2 receptors on other types of tissue, for example, GI cells and other tissues such as cardiac tissues, potentially. And so that does call into question the fact that this virus may impact other areas of the body, and we do see a small portion of patients that develop COVID-19 will have gastrointestinal symptoms or signs and symptoms that may or may not be related to the virus impacting those tissues. I'm not entirely sure what's going on at this point. And we also have some cardiovascular complications that can occur in patients, and that may or may not be related to ACE2 receptor on those tissues and the virus penetrating those cells and infecting those cells. And this does call into question a very large and common class of drugs, or two of them, the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and the angiotensin receptor blockers, the ACEIs or the ARBs, and these are very commonly used for blood pressure or hypertensive treatment because they block angiotensin converting enzyme. They block the enzyme that converts angiotensin into its active form, angiotensin 2. And it does appear that if we put somebody on an ACE inhibitor, that ACE inhibitor may cause their cells to express more ACE receptors, specifically ACE2 receptor. And so there is a hypothesis, and I want to say that this is a hypothesis, this is not great evidence at this point to suggest this is in fact a problem, but there is a hypothesis that putting somebody on ACE inhibitor or patients that are on ACE inhibitors may be at higher risk for complications from COVID-19. Now, we do see that people with hypertension tend to be at higher risk. Might some of that be due to the fact that they're on ACE inhibitors? I don't think we know at this point, but it is just something worth mentioning, and it's obviously something that is being investigated at this point. Okay, so that's where we're at with the basic pathophysiology of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I'm going to end video number 1 here, and then we'll pick up on the second video talking about the basic epidemiology of this virus and this disease. All right, guys, take care and hopefully you are having a good time doing whatever it is you may be doing in spite of what we are dealing as a society. Take care, everyone.